So, okay, everybody. A warm welcome from my side. My name is Oliver Bertsching. I'm the President and Managing Director of the Chamber of Commerce, Switzerland, Central Eastern Europe. I would like to start today's CEE-Swiss Simple session on time. It is, unfortunately, a very sad topic that we all would have hoped that we don't have to treat. The ones who have listened to our last CEE-Swiss Impulse session, which was an economic outlook, our specialists meant the chances to see this happening, they thought is very, very slim. Now it is reality, and SEC, the Chamber of Commerce that I represent, and all the other 10 organizations in the regions, most of them, we wanted to treat this topic because we believe it's very current and important to all of us. And we want to give you another insight. We hear a lot of news about this, but we wanted to give you another insight, a bit with a more on a focus on CEE and Switzerland and with Swiss experts. And this is what we are going to do today. I wanted to show you the 10 organizing chambers of commerce in the region, and actually those chambers of commerce, they are all of course affected together with their countries by the war. And today I just wanted to mention that also we from SEC, we are in a very small way trying to support the humanitarian aspect of this. And we have created a homepage, a page on our homepage. You see the link here. There we post worthy initiatives, mostly by our colleague chambers of commerce, who are all very active to support what is happening to the people mostly. So I just wanted to invite you, if you have a worthy initiative that you want us to post, where we are trying to link people that are helping with people that want to help, please write us an email, let us know at info@ceep.swiss. This one is not too important, but you can rewatch the session. And before I start and introduce our two speakers, I want also to give you a couple of technicalities. First of all, I would like to say that this is also special, but always the case. This session does not represent my view, or our chamber's view, or the view of the chamber of the region. It's the view of our two speakers, and we're very happy that they're willing to share their thoughts. We want, as we always, this to be interactive. So if you have a question, you can always post it on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If you have something worthwhile to share, write it into the chat. At the end, we will have the speakers will talk about 30 minutes. Then we have some time to discuss your Q&As. We try to finish the session at 11:45, and you will receive the slides afterwards, and you can rewatch the session, as I said, on YouTube. You will all receive an email afterwards, which will summarize all this. Okay, so let me introduce the two speakers. I already spent too much time. Philippe Welti and Daniel Woker have a lengthy career in the Swiss diplomatic service. So ultimately as ambassadors of Switzerland to various countries, including Iran, India, Kuwait, Australia, and Singapore. And they decided not just to, spend their retirement golfing, but they actually went and had a startup and a successful company called Sharon Ambassador Geopolitical Coaching. And as new entrepreneurs, they are often asked by companies, but also by institutions, to share their thoughts on geopolitical aspects. They do a lot of other things. You see that in the flyer, but without further ado, I would like to pass over to Daniel Woker and Philippe Welti.
Thank you, Oliver. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Grüezi miteinander. The Ukraine war, Putin's aggression against a sovereign country, the Ukraine, has shown the importance of geopolitics. Geopolitics, that is a close look at the politics, at the economy, and the society of a given region, of a given country. Here, of course, Russia. That constant observation that you do when you look at geopolitics, we call that geopolitical due diligence. Geopolitical due diligence, and it's a permanent task within every company, within every private service company, such as Chamber of Commerce, because it can help you to at least avoid some of the impact of black swans, these happenings, international happenings that just come like falling from the sky. Let me give you an example. We are now, of course, in full war mode with regard to the Ukraine, but already now it is not impossible that we will see something like this with regard to China. Not at all sure, but it cannot be excluded. So prudent geopolitics means that a company, any economic body looks now at what would happen if Western sanction, if US sanction would also be applied against China. Now into the substance of things, I pass over. I'll give the floor to Philippe Welti for the background of the Ukraine war.
Thank you, Daniel. Please, Oliver, slide 1 and then slide 2. This is slide 1, the title, and slide 2 is my topic. Here we are. I start with one assertion. Putin's operation now is war. I don't take sides by saying so, but it is war by any standard. This war, Putin's war against Ukraine, tends to become a massive failure, militarily speaking, and more. The full conquest of the country is out of question, if that was one purpose, and even limited objections seem to be stranded in the current situation, military situation on the ground. The background of this operation, of this war, is that Russia has lost the Eastern European belt, the bloc, which used to protect the Soviet Union. It has even lost parts of the former Soviet Union. I'm speaking about the Baltics. So Putin's strategic goal is and must have been to reconstitute the territorial Soviet Union, and second, rebuild and maintain global respect and relevance for Russia as such, as a power. Both goals have failed. The operation, this war, recalls two historic events. One is the Tsarist expansion and aggressive imperialism of the 18th and 19th century, and the Soviet expansion in the 20th century. The Tsarist expansion, 18th, 19th century, was legitimate by the standards then valid, and it was the normal right and the behavior of the strong at that time. Look at the British and the French expansion in the as colonial powers. What is new is that towards the end of the 20th century, in the 21st century, this war is in breach of all rules of international order and international law and standards. Now, what are the reasons? We distinguish between pretended reasons and real reasons. The pretended reasons, that what Putin has told us all, is that he has been invited to protect the Russians living in the Ukraine and to protect Russia against a pretended aggression, a planned regression of NATO, from NATO through Ukraine against Russia. These are the pretended reasons. The real reasons are start with the trauma of the loss of Eastern Bloc and parts of Soviet Union. The key moment was the Maidan Revolution in 2014, when the Ukrainians demonstrated that they were about to start as a democracy, and democracy would become a challenge, a philosophical challenge and a competition to Putin's rule. This was clearly for Putin a fundamental threat to his rule. He had to destroy the looming of a successful example of Ukraine in his neighborhood, a successful example of possibly a successful example of democracy, of liberal economy, of NATO accession, which will give them more protection, and Western and NATO installations near the Russian border. This is a trauma for Putin. He, in his view, had to do something about it. And he has indicated that early on when he said that the disintegration of the Soviet Union was the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of 20th century. So he is trying to turn back the wheel of history. This is the genuine desire and the goal and the operative objective of the war. There's an immediate impact that is the brutalization of operation. The more the operation appears to be stalled, the more the Ukraine defense is effective, the more the Russian aggression will turn ruthless, which is a daily development. Another part of the immediate impact is Russia is becoming the new pariah of world history, and Putin a war criminal comparable to Saddam and Hitler Göring. With this, I turn to Daniel Woker for, next slide, please, for the full impact of the reaction by NATO and the European Union. Please, Daniel.
Thank you, Philippe. The full failure of Putin's aggression already now can be seen in the result already, what is happening at this time with NATO and EU. NATO, the most significant development is that Finland almost certainly, Sweden probably too, will become members of NATO. Thus, the NATO border of Russia will expand by about 1,500 kilometers. Pretty much exactly what Putin always said he wanted to prevent, to have NATO at its borders. Just the opposite has happened through his disastrous aggression. The many Eastern and Middle and Nordic countries are, of course, already very much members of the NATO. After this aggression, they're not only going to be members, but even more so members. It was clearly demonstrated to anybody that there is a clear and present danger going out from Russia, at least at this time, at least as long as Russia is under Vladimir Putin. We should not forget that all European countries and even Central Asian countries, the STAN countries, but also the Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia are already now, or have been already before the invasion, so-called partner countries of NATO. Switzerland, incidentally, has the main status. We will probably see development in that area too, not full NATO membership. It's pretty clear that the Ukraine is not going to be member of the NATO, at least not in the immediate future, but there's going to be a clear development towards NATO by all these countries. Let's have a look at the European Union. The clear result, the first evident result of the Ukraine war is that the CEO has gotten stronger, that the EU has gotten stronger. And not only has it gotten stronger, not only have the traditional problem kits of the EU in Eastern Europe shown extraordinary resistance under the Russian pressure. For the first time, not for the first time, but for the first time seriously, we hear talk about developing the military, the security policy side of the EU, which when you look at the overall picture is also very significant because NATO is of course there. NATO is a very strong power, by far the strongest military alliance in the world at this time and under the Biden government in the United States. But unfortunately, with regard to the United States, when you look in the medium-term future, and when you think back of the 4 years under President Trump, then the EU, Europe has to hedge its bets with regard to security policy, and other than NATO, have a second pillar, which is a European security policy. The membership in the EU for those who are not members, those Eastern European countries that are not members of the EU, look a little bit more, or don't only look, they are more complex because obviously membership in the EU implies a lot of things. It implies an enormous amount of laws that have to be brought in line with the European standards. It means competition roles. It means even human rights within the economic sphere. Basic obstacles have to be removed. We know from past accession stories, corruption, for example. You've all seen that only yesterday, a very recent prime minister, the former prime minister of Bulgaria, has been arrested in his own country because he embezzled, it appears that he embezzled EU money. So corruption and the eradication of corruption is a major point that the EU nowadays and after the Ukraine war will even more put emphasis on it. We have requests for EU membership from Moldavia and Ukraine. This is not going to happen tomorrow. As I said, it's a complex process. But again, the EU is, through that war of Putin, is ever coming closer to Russia. Last but not least, Putin in the past has always said that his Eurasian Economic Union, not going to go in what it is Putin thought of it as the Russian equivalent of the EU, and Putin's try to say we should have a bridge between the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union. All this is now, of course, totally impossible because nobody is going to touch the war criminal Putin any longer. Now, to the reaction of the key countries to outside Europe to Putin's war. I'll come to the next point, slide 4, please. The most important reaction, the most important country in this respect is China. We don't have a definite reaction yet. Let me quickly just run down the list of reasons why China will continue. It has already a little bit, at least in the international organization, why China will continue to support Russia. For closer cooperation with Russia, we'll have to think of that Xi Jinping and Putin, they share two things. They have a very basic hatred for the West, and they are afraid of functioning, at least partly functioning, democracies at their borders, because evidently they fear that their own people might have a look at these democracies and say, why can't we be governed like this? We also have to think of the economic side. Once Russia cannot export to other parts of the world, all the exports will have to go to China. China will be in a monopolistic situation and of course can get raw materials, oil, gas, etc. to a much lower price from Russia. On the other hand, there are quite a few reasons to think that China, even Xi Jinping, will think twice when it really comes push to shove, whether they really want to support Putin and support Russia in this present war. For more distance from Putin's Russia, please, the following reasons. China is much more than Russia dependent on Western economy. The opposite is also true, but we should not forget that with boycotts from the US and the EU together, China would quite simply go into a very serious recession. There's also a reputational damage from siding with Russia. Putin has bloody hands now. He's an international pariah, as Philippe pointed out. The military shock in the PLA and the Chinese forces must be considerable when they look that not even with a simple overland operation, the mighty, so-called considered mighty Russian army has been able to subdue Ukraine. How is it going to be for the PLA should they want to attack Taiwan over the sea? What is quite remarkable is also how fast the Russian assets in the rest of the world have been frozen. China who has a much larger ethnic assets in the West, must think twice when they see that overnight they could lose all access to these funds. Last but not least, not much discussed, some of them, not all of them, but some of the Belt and Road Initiative routes went through Russia from China to Europe, etc. These are, of course, now quickly becoming impassable. So it's not clear how China will really, with whom China will go, but sooner or later, pretty much sooner, they will have to show exactly what they, how they will react now in the response to Putin's aggression. Now over to Philippe for the reaction of some other big powers. Philippe.
Thank you, Daniel. We could discuss all the countries in the world. We have picked 3: China, India, Iran, plus the Gulf. India. India, I start with this point, has abstained from a condemnation resolution in the Security Council, which may have been a surprise to some, but which is not completely surprising, bearing in mind India's past. The reasons behind India's positioning is that India has a decades-old partnership between socialist India and the Soviet Union. This is a strong legacy. One element of this legacy is that India is still very heavily dependent on Russian military procurement. They still buy heavily Russian military goods, and this is in itself a reason not to condemn Russia quickly. And there is there's another reason, a very long-standing ally. Russia has been a long-standing ally of India against China. The real traumatic enemy of India is China, has been for decades. So to have Soviet Union at their side was a relief for India. And in addition, among the reasons behind this abstention is certainly India's natural, so to say, natural inclination not to take sides in European conflicts. This is an old third world inclination, typical third world inclination. What are the prospects? Because this is going to change. India has, under Prime Minister Modi, dramatically changed its strategic orientation. It has turned to the US for a partnership offered in the year 2000 by Clinton, by the way. India has integrated itself steadily, step by step, into the Indo-Pacific alliance against Chinese expansion. India is part of the setting against China's expansion in the Indo-Pacific. And the very ultimate strategic goal for India is to contain China. It has nothing to do with Russia, it's about containing China. And now, in as much as China supports Russia now in this war, this becomes a strong reason for India to take sides against Russia in this war on Ukraine. One more country we have picked to see from close is the Iran. Iran is a very interesting case study, good for a case study, for an interesting case study. Iran has been living in a similar isolation as Russia will be now under US sanctions. It has been declared, it's been treated like a pariah of world politics. And this has caused Iran, quite naturally, so to say, to incline to stand by Russia. But Iran, in international trade, has a very, very similar profile like Russia. It has the same interests in global trade because it exports, first of all, natural resources. So that is oil and gas, first of all. So Iran is a competitor on the world market, is a competitor of Russia. And so there is no long-term interest to join Russia, bearing in mind that they will end up in a competitive opposition to each other. Now we experience an interesting term concerning Iran. Since Trump went out of the so-called nuclear deal, we have seen nuclear talks taking place in order to fix the nuclear deal again. And these nuclear talks are said to be opening up for some new arrangement. The US are pushing, everybody was pushing, and Russia is part of that setting. Russia is a party to the deal. Now, the very newest development is that the Russians recognize, in the Iran case, a possibility to oppose the US by obstructing these nuclear deal negotiations with Iran. And this might be an occasion, an incentive for the US to become more open to Iran demands. So this is an open case, an interesting case study. We will be studying from close because I know Iran personally well. Now, a last word regarding the other oil producers from the region, that is the Arab Gulf states. In principle, they are in the same competition with Iran and Russia on the oil market. They have refused to Biden, to the US, to alleviate the growing demand on the market, demand for oil and gas, which has been caused now because Russia is excluded from the world market. And it's quite a thing for Saudis to refuse US demands. And this refusal is inspired by the classic, I call it third world inclination not to take sides in European conflicts. And the new strategic asset they seem to have now is to use oil and gas as a powerful political tool. Now they seem to take a revenge against US President Biden, who has clearly indicated that he dislikes the Saudi regime. But this Saudi and Gulf state obstruction, if that goes on, will not be sustainable because they will, in the long run, in any case, go on to depend on Western demand of oil and gas, and dependent on Western technology. That's what I wanted to say on that topic. Next slide, please, and back over to Daniel, who will be speaking on one of the key topics for us, that is Switzerland position. Daniel, it's yours.
Thank you, Philippe. First, a statement, and then 3 quick points. Ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland is not a bystander. We are in war with Russia, just as any other Western European country is. Why? Because in at least 2 areas, Switzerland is an economic heavyweight with regard to Russia. The first is oil and gas. The trade in oil and gas, 80% of Russian oil and gas is being traded. Of course, that doesn't mean physically, but traded by the traders through Switzerland. And as we all know, for the time being, but this might not last, this exports and the payment for this export from the West to Russia continue. But this will also slowly, maybe not so slowly, die down. So it is wrong to think of Switzerland as, well, small little Switzerland, neutral country on the sidelines. We're totally in it. And it means, as you've seen, a first point, we have fully joined, Switzerland has fully joined the EU sanctions against Russia. Fully, whether all sanction lists, all names on the sanctions list are really followed up is not quite sure yet, but you can be assured of one thing. The Western side, and especially the Americans, will look very closely how the allies, how the EU, but also very much Switzerland follows the sanctions. Second point, neutrality. Ladies and gentlemen, I make this brief. Neutrality had very, very little to do, had very, very little place in that reaction of the Swiss government to fully join the EU sanctions against Russia. Even though the government was speaking of a major a decision with regard to neutrality, that's simply not so. That's serving a myth, a mythos. Neutrality is something quite different. What we've seen with this taking over is quite simply a, no doubt, prudent, probably the only possible solution in foreign policy for Switzerland. The last point is also quite important. That decision to fully go along with the EU sanctions, with the Western sanctions, also clearly shows that the Ukraine war is what we call in German eine Zeitenwende for Switzerland, eine Zeitenwende, meaning that our relationship with the EU, with all the consequences, it's not the place to discuss that, has already and will change considerably in the new future. So much for Switzerland, but now we want to spare some time to come to the 2 points that probably interest you the most, namely, what are the impacts on Eastern Europe? Philippe will talk about that. And then what will be the impact on Eastern Europe, as we said before in history, the Balkans. So over to Philippe for Eastern Europe and the war.
Thank you, Daniel. By Eastern, we mean Central and Eastern Europe. And most of these countries were part of the Eastern Bloc protecting the Soviet Union against the rest of the world, and they have experience with Soviet expansion and imperialism of bygone times. The most remarkable event we have seen in recent days is the extraordinarily courageous action by government of Poland, Czechs, and Slovenia to take a train and to travel to Kiev in order to demonstrate their support, their moral and political support for the Ukraine government. This is extremely courageous, and it is a very strong political signal from which all of Europe will profit. It will strengthen Poland, Czechs and Slovenia's standing in the EU and in the NATO framework for unambiguously taking sides. It was a masterly stroke, so to say, strike. What is the consequence of this courageous act? First, these countries will profit from a future NATO priority, that is to strengthen the eastern borders of the alliance against Russia. Second, these countries will profit from prestige for having done that action. And third, they will profit from the huge reconstruction boom one day when the world will unite to reconstruct Ukraine, whose infrastructure has been destroyed by Russian war. And this means that these countries, I mean, especially Poland, Czechs, and Slovenia, have proven to be loyal to the EU and to NATO principles, and that was an immediate demand, and it was very, very far-sighted. Now, next slide, please. With the next slide, I turn it back to Daniel and to the Balkans, which we call nowadays Southeast Europe, of course. Please, Daniel.
Thank you, Philippe. Southeast Europe, 3 points to that. Ladies and gentlemen, for the traditional friends of Russia, friends, I mean some sort of connections with regard to the history, with regard to ethnic criteria, with regard to the language, relations between those traditional friends, be it in Bulgaria, be it in Serbia, be it in Bosnia-Herzegovina, at least in the Serbska Republic of Milorad Dodik, will have, these friends of Russia will no longer have any ground to stand on. You cannot play the Russian card when you have at the top of Russia somebody like Putin. Second, and remember what I said in the beginning, start thinking now of what other effects, major effects could be of the Ukrainian war. Second is that also playing the China card, especially, of course, if China is not clearly turning against Russia, playing the China card will become more difficult. What do I want to say with this? Let's quickly mention the 16 plus 1. Plus 1 is, of course, China. 16 is a whole range from way up north down to the Black Sea of European countries who have always hedged their bets with the EU a little bit in saying, well, we can also go with China. This is going to become much more difficult. Third point, and Philippe has already talked about that also, Oliver Bertschinger, you have mentioned it. The countries that you represent, that your Chamber of Commerce represent, will have first heavy cost of the Ukraine war, hosting all the many refugees. There will probably be a certain economic recession, etc. The initial cost will be there, and it's only to be hoped, and I think it will happen, that the rest of Europe will help these countries. But don't forget, them in the middle and in the longer run, there might be also quite a boom, in the sense of right now these countries have a large influx of well-trained Ukrainian workers, Ukrainians, of course, who will contribute positively to the economies. That is certainly a well-deserved, in that, as Philippe pointed it out, a well-deserved potential benefit in the future. Now, we'll have some time, Oliver, to go into questions. Could you take over and monitor these?
Okay, so thank you very much, Daniel, Philippe, for this very broad view. So for everybody, you can write us questions. We had like one question from, one is a bit larger. I start with Martin Hasler's question. Thank you very much for these insights. What could be a face-saving outcome for Putin, and what would that mean for Europe?
Shall I start, Philippe? You'll chip in too. I'm not sure whether there is any face-saving exit. Not for Putin himself. For Russia, the best, of course, facing would be if the top man changes. But we're not speculating about that. There's so much speculation about what it could be. I see little other possibility than insisting on some sort or a remnant of some sort of influence in the areas that already are under Russian control. It is hard to believe that Ukrainians, even under the immense duress, would agree to or for once and forever renounce on parts of the country which, according to all laws of international relations, are really Ukrainian. Thus, I'm I think just about everybody else, quite unsure how this all is going to end. Philippe.
My addition to it is very clear, very simple, very short. Why saving Putin's face? There is no face to be saved. He is done by history. This man must disappear before the rest of the world, led by the US and Ukraine somehow, decide to negotiate about the future. In the immediate, of course, he has some bargaining power because his troops are there, but he is already the pariah, and Russia and the Russians are by now, for the coming 2 generations, Ukrainians' arch enemy. They have replaced Nazi Germany in the world history. So you don't seek face-saving tricks. He has to go out. He has to go out of Ukraine, and if he keeps something, it will be just a favor, an operative favor, because Ukraine is still very weak militarily. But the game is over. The game is over. Don't move away from this recognition. The game is over for Putin, is over for Russia as a decent country in the world. I don't say that because I would like to take side. I do not take side. I just judge by standards and the rules and the law.
Okay.
And if I can say one more word to that, it's of course quite obvious that Putin can never put a foot outside Russia into that in any way linked to our Western system, because there will be, of course, penal and other sanction against the very man, against Putin. Not only Putin, others too, Lavrov, etc. But he is now going to be a prisoner of in his own country.
Okay, so strong views there. Good. We have, again, to everybody that is listening, we have like at 44, we always finish at 45. We will continue the Q&A. Stay with us. For the ones who have to leave us, there will be a new CEE-Swiss Impulse session on innovation coming soon, on the war for water. Now, this is not the real war. It's a more of a, but it is true happening. People fight for water. And other very interesting topics that we want to give you some inspiration on. So thanks a lot. And we continue with the Q&A. We have somebody asking, thank you very much for sharing valuable experiences. What about Turkey's position? Can they really facilitate talks?
Interesting question. Turkey, incidentally, like Israel, has played a certain role because they have good relations. Turkey has good relations with both Russia and Ukraine, and is a NATO member. They also deliver some very crucial technology, if not weapon systems as a total, to both sides, or have done so. So the Turkey is one of the few countries that might have a certain leverage on both sides. Philippe.
I just add, Turkey is the key government in this setting now. Now, it's the only country, it's not Israel, which can go in and do what they have done already. Turkey is the mediating power or potential power for a solution.
Okay.
For many reasons, but I don't expand. Otherwise, you get a lecture from me, and that's not what you have asked for.
Okay, very good. Interesting to know. We have a question of how do you expect the positive effect on the labor market in Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, etc. to play out? Apparently, there is not much interest in working yet, with most of the refugees being women with children not knowing the language and wanting to go back to the Ukraine at the earliest convenience.
Yeah, that's of course true. And we're talking of very short-term effects. It all depends how long this is going to last. Of course, but that's quite unlikely right now. If we see sort of a total, if you can even talk of a victory on the Ukraine side, and Putin has to actually take his troops out, then we might see a move back to the Ukraine of Ukrainians. Yes, it is true, they're mostly women and children, but who said that women cannot work, especially when they have to provide for their families, because there are so many out there. And I'll have to say, Western countries, including Switzerland, have been very open with regard to work by those who came. Then it could well be that we are seeing here something which we have seen in other scales and in other totally different circumstances, in other wars, to become at least a semi-lasting solution. Where would Switzerland's economy be without some Tamuls who have been, since their forced exile to Switzerland, quite busy? Now, I'm not saying this is in any way comparable, but what I'm saying is you could be quite surprised how quickly Ukrainians would integrate if they can't go back, or if it takes a long time because infrastructure has to be rebuilt, etc., for them to go back.
My addition is very short. We have to distinguish between the short time and the long term. In the short term, of course, these masses of refugees will cause structural difficulties. Of course, that's always so. But the long-term view is a completely different one. If the hosting governments, Poland first in line, manage that smartly, they can turn that into a big asset. Either the Ukrainians who stay in Poland, there will be a major addition, an asset in the country, bringing new knowledge, bringing new connections to the rest of the Eastern world, that is Ukraine. And those who go back will be the basis on which Poland, I say Poland, but I mean the others too, but Poland is the biggest one in this respect. The Ukrainians who return to Ukraine, this is a long term, will become a major asset in promoting Eastern European interests in the Ukraine, which will become a big place of reconstruction, and then a place for industrial development. For all those who give up in Russia, they need a new place. Ukraine will be the next Russia as industrial base for those who want to invest. So, positive long term.
Okay. Well, maybe one comment from the chambers. The Chamber of Commerce, Switzerland, Central Eastern Europe. So my organization, we are based in Switzerland. All the other organizations are based in the region. You know, I think now it's also a bit the time that we try harder than before to improve the relationships between Switzerland on all kinds of levels to your countries. And I just wanted to make that is really what I'm trying to do with my organization to improve and strengthen the ties between Switzerland and this bloc. And if you have any idea how we can do that better, if you want to join us, if you want to join the Chambers of Commerce in the region, do that. I think it's a good time to actively help also organizations like ours to be able to do, stuff that will help the ties. Good. So anyway, we have another one. Can a trip of all, I like that one, of all EU leaders to Kiev stop the aggressor, in your opinion?
No, we have seen now, I don't think this would be very conductive or helpful. We have seen that trip of 3 heads of states or prime ministers that Philippe was talking about. It had very positive effects, but a war is not a place where individual showing off should take place, or in general. And I would add to this also in the way of a little comment to what you just said, Oliver. The main, if EU country leaders would go, why shouldn't then the Swiss president of the Confederation be with it too? We are also part of the Europe. No, I don't think that's a very good idea. But on the other hand, I very much agree with Oliver. The war in Ukraine has driven home to the last European, all through to Portugal, that Europe goes to the Russian border. There is a bigger Europe. And if you look at it like this, Poland and other countries, which traditionally we thought always, they're in the East, have become very much part and the middle of Europe. And I add that the best way Switzerland could be closer to Europe, of course, I'm talking now of countries and states. You do a very good job, Oliver, but the best way Switzerland could do is by becoming member of the EU. That would really strengthen the EU and the EU sanction and the EU's position in Eastern Europe.
Okay, very good. So we
broaden
the scope, Philippe.
Just very short additions. One about the middle of Europe. Lviv, Western Ukraine city, used to be called Lemberg. Lviv is the absolute geographic center of Europe. Keep that in mind. And it's a city in the Ukraine. One remark. Second remark, this very strong political signal by these avant-garde politicians, pioneers from Poland, Slovenia, and Czech, was so courageous, was sort of a break of a taboo. And you don't break a taboo twice.
Okay, very good. Do you see a real danger? So we got the last 3 questions. If Slovaks hand over their S-300 systems to Ukrainians, that it will be seen by Russians as unacceptable NATO interference with the situation. If so, what answer reaction would you expect from them?
Yeah. That's too much speculation. Of course, handing over weapons to Ukraine increases the risk of another totally irrational decision by Putin. And we know, of course, very well, I don't even have to spell it out, what the ultimate irrational action of Putin could be in the way of a Dr. Strangelove. It probably will slowly come to that, if not openly, then maybe through channels, but of course to channels that are informal, but of course they will also come into the open. But it is a relatively touchy topic, and we've seen that so far, especially Western Europe, but also the United States, the Biden government, and in my opinion, quite rightly so, have hesitated to lead Putin on to ever more irrational decisions.
Okay, good. I get the impression, which is not me, that's a question. I get the impression that Poland is playing a special role in the current situation. I can see a special effort. I would assume that Poland is counting on the EU financial support, in addition to the reasons you mentioned, NATO priority, prestige, etc. What do you think is driving Poland?
Philippe?
Yeah, it's very clear. Poland is the biggest country in the region. It's the strongest. And it has a very old and very strong historic attachment to the Ukraine. Ukraine big parts, large parts of Ukraine used to be once, long time ago, parts of Poland. So Poland and Ukraine are very close to each other. They have partly a common history. So I experienced as abroad, when I was stationed to Tehran or to Delhi, the Polish ambassador, my colleague from the Polish embassy, always tried to support, to sponsor the Ukrainian ambassador, who was a bit everywhere, a bit a newcomer, he didn't know so well. Poles feel responsible, so to say, for Ukraine's future, out of many, many reasons. Some of them are historic. And it's the strongest country in the region anyway. So they have to do what they do, and they want to do what they do.
Okay. Yeah, also looking, well, on all my discussions, I'm really very far away, but all those countries, what I hear, it's really tremendous. What I hear, what the governments are doing, what the people are doing. So congratulations again. If we can support, we will do what we can. Anyway, can you imagine the split up of the Ukraine?
This should not be acceptable as an idea, even if they end up with leaving certain areas under Russian control, which is probably part of the negotiations, I guess. Even if this happens, the sheer idea of splitting the country into West Ukraine, East Ukraine, I don't know what, should be unacceptable to anybody. It might be one of the remaining operative objectives of Putin, but this should be a no-go for everybody else in the negotiations. And I very much hope that if it comes to such a question, that the most important mediator, Turkey, let's say, does not promote this as an outcome, as a possible outcome. I mean, this is very much, it's a personal opinion. I think it should be unacceptable as an idea.
And I think it's not only your personal opinion, it would be quite unacceptable to any kind of Western country.
And the Ukrainians themselves.
Not to talk of the Ukrainians themselves, of course, but Russia and Putin would never get away with this internationally. They would be banned. As I said, their pariah status would thus be prolonged into a long, long future. I know in international, both Philippe and I have been in international relations since a long time. Of course, things get forgotten and times change and passions cool down. But the aggression against Ukraine, the fact that by social media today, you see to a totally unheard and unseen extent what actually it means when you start talking of cruise missiles on hospitals and children's hospitals and schools and flats, then the reaction on the Western side, on the side of the whole civilized world, will not be temporary. It will last. And a divided Ukraine will never be accepted back into, in the sense of the Russian side, will never be accepted back into the circle of civilized nations. Okay, clear view. Last two questions. So no more questions to be sent, but we'd like to answer all of them. It's noon, everybody's hungry, I guess, but it's great that you all stick here. So thank you for Daniel and Philippe. We have two more questions. So one is many thanks, etc. to you two. What possible scenarios, there are two questions. What possible scenarios from Russia do you foresee for Baltic states? They are NATO members with many native Russians living there. Should EU develop any financial support mechanisms for states
who accommodate great amount of Ukrainian refugees?
If I quickly can say yes to the second, but and this is being done, and once again, if Switzerland would be a member, we could contribute to that. What we do is see what the EU does and then come afterwards and say, okay, we would like to participate also, because it's an evident task. That is the answer to my second question. The answer to the first question, that's a very pertinent question. Of course, it is the weak spot of NATO, of EU, of Europe, that Sulawesi gap, which is the very small part of Lithuania that divides Belarusia on the one hand, the only unconditional friend of Russia, and Königsberg on the others, Kaliningrad on the other side, which of course is still Russian for historical reasons. It's not so much the EU that is being challenged, it is NATO. And I can assure you that the NATO generals are already in all kinds of, or have already been, but will now even accelerate their thinking of exactly how the tripwires in the Baltic states could be so solid that not even an out of his mind leader like Putin is right now would dare to attack them.
My addition is trivial. The Baltic states are much more vulnerable than the rest of Eastern European countries, because they were part of the Soviet Union, which is not the case for Poland and Czechs, etc. They are very vulnerable, but the rest of Europe knows that and has acknowledged that. So what is going on now in the Baltic states is exactly that. They are being armed. That is a priority for the NATO. I don't know anything about their planning, but from what we get to hear in the media, it is seen and is treated like a priority. Baltic, get ready against a possible madman attack militarily. What I can see by speculating more about the future is, if ever this madman operation against Baltics would be launched, this would immediately integrate Sweden and Finland into the war front. And then we have a big war in the north, which will be lost by Russia for sure very quickly, because Finland and Sweden in a NATO context are unbeaten there.
Okay, I come to the last question. What is your forecast for the war conflict in terms of duration and outcome? Well, the outcome we heard, but the duration?
Short of getting rid of Putin within Russia, it will have to happen within Russia. Unfortunately, the war will, and its effects will linger.
What I add is, yes, we're in war there, it will go on, but there's one, I'm an optimist by nature, there's one interesting trend. Ukraine resistance is growing, effectiveness of defense is growing, and effectiveness of the aggression is coming down. So these are two trends which might tend towards an abbreviation. I mean, it's already much longer, it has lasted much longer than what Putin thought, but there will be an end. There will be an end because of these trends crossing each other.
Okay, good. So let me thank Daniel and Woker and Philippe Welti very much for your views. Again, not our views, we are also politically neutral as Chambers of Commerce. That's why we try to help on the refugee front and in the humanitarian front, etc. But I think this insight has been outstanding. And yesterday I was at an event to close up that just came to my mind, and we talked about innovation and creativity, and innovation and creativity is always that you come up with something that hasn't been there before, that you kind of like see what is happening and then come up with solutions that no one has ever thought of. And I hope for all of us and the region and Ukraine, also Russians who are not maybe really behind that war, that we will find such a creative outcome that we all don't know yet what that could be. But with that in mind, I'd like to thanks again and close this session.
Bye. All the best.
Good luck for everybody.